To support our discussions with the world's leading thinkers, please see the video description or visit eism.eu/support. Thank you.
Welcome to A Theory of Everything. Today, as part of our leadership series of interviews, we're talking to Brother Guy Consolmagno, a Jesuit astronomer and the current director of the Vatican Observatory. Brother Guy holds bachelor's and master's degrees in planetary science from MIT and a PhD in planetary science from the University of Arizona. Before taking on his role at the helm of the Vatican Observatory, he lectured at both Harvard and MIT and has had numerous formal ties to many of the world's leading science and educational institutions. He agreed to talk to me about his work at the Vatican Observatory and about the recent discovery of the last recorded interview of Georges Lemaitre, the Belgian astronomer and Catholic priest, often referred to as the so-called father of the Big Bang. The Big Bang, for those who don't know, is one of the most important and consequential discoveries in modern science. In preparation for this interview, I thought it would be interesting to warm up by asking ChatGPT a couple of questions. ChatGPT is the large language artificial intelligence model that is making so many waves in the news these days. At the European Institute of Science and Management, the primary lens through which we see and analyze the world is management, and for better or for worse, the most successful management project in the history of humanity, at least in terms of longevity, is the Catholic Church. I asked GPT about this, and this is what it responded.
The Catholic Church is indeed the oldest organization in continuous existence today. It was founded by Jesus Christ and his apostles over 2,000 years ago, and has been in continuous operation since that time. Throughout its history, the Catholic Church has undergone many changes and challenges, but has remained an enduring institution with a global reach and influence. In this sense, the Catholic Church is considered the oldest organization in the world still in operation today, and its longevity is a testament to its significance and impact on world history.
I then asked ChatGPT if, contrary to popular opinion, the Catholic Church has made any significant contributions to science, and here's what it said.
The Catholic Church has made many significant contributions to the field of science throughout history. Many prominent scientists and astronomers, including Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, and Georges Lemaitre, were Catholic, and their work has had a major impact on our understanding of the natural world. The Catholic Church has also supported scientific research and education through its universities and institutions, such as the Vatican Observatory and the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which have been at the forefront of scientific discovery for many centuries.
The coincidence of these words from ChatGPT and Brother Consolmagno's main message in this exchange is noteworthy and bears reflection, in my opinion. I've made many mistakes on this channel, and I'm bound to make a lot more. One of them was not asking Brother Guy for more time. He has so many interesting things to say. I hope to have him back at some point to let him really develop his ideas and also to give him a little respectful pushback. In any case, I hope you find the exchange as thought-provoking as I have. As always, you'll find a timestamp and several relevant links in the video description. Thanks again for your time and interest, and here is my brief discussion with Brother Guy Consolmagno, the so-called papal astronomer. Brother Consolmagno, welcome to A Theory of Everything, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk.
It's a delight to be here. Thanks.
Great. Well, we agreed to talk about the recent publication of the last recorded interview with Georges Lemaitre, the Catholic priest, theoretical physicist, astronomer, and so-called father of the Big Bang. Before we get to that, however, for those listeners who are immediately skeptical of the claim that religion is even compatible with science, can I begin by asking you to comment on some of the most significant contributions historically of Catholic men and women to science?
Sure. We could, of course, go back all the way to the Middle Ages, and so Albert the Great was considered by many to be the first scientist or the father of science, and the science was developed. The idea of rational inquiry into the universe was a part of the medieval universities. But I'll give you a name that may surprise a number of your listeners as a great honored Catholic scientist, and that's Galileo Galilei. Yes, he got in trouble with the church. He wouldn't be the first good Catholic to get in trouble with the church, but he remained a devout Catholic, even through the unfair trial that he went through. And when you read the transcript of the trial, which is available in English, you find it's not what you think. It's not some big debate between science and faith. He was caught up in the politics of the day, and the exact details are still a point of great argument among historians. But we all agree, all the historians agree, it had nothing to do with faith and science, because at the same time that Galileo was working, there were a number of other great Jesuits and other priests who were working in the field of science. I mentioned the Jesuits because I'm a member of the Jesuit order. We always got to brag. But, just a few years after that trial, Giambattista Riccioli put together the first telescopic map of the moon using the nomenclature that we use to this day. And he started the tradition of naming craters on the moon for great scientists like Copernicus, like Galileo, like Kepler, like himself, and 30 other Jesuits. All the way to the present time, you can think of Gregor Mendel, the inventor of genetics, who was, of course, a monk. Your phone probably has a charger listing things in volts and amps. Volta and ampere were both devout Catholics. And into the 20th century, you've got Georges Lemaitre, who we'll be talking about now, the fellow who came up with the idea of the Big Bang. And there was a historian of science, John Hilbrun, who says, through the Middle Ages and into the Enlightenment, the Catholic Church probably supported science more than any other institution, just in terms of sheer numbers and money. And when people want to say that there's a conflict, they always bring up Galileo, because they don't have any other example to bring up.
Excellent. To what do you attribute this anti-Catholicism in terms of its commitment to science?
Well, there's a lot of anti-Catholicism out there in general, and there's plenty of reasons. If you want to get mad at the church, there are better reasons to get mad at the church than because of science and religion. That's not something the church has gotten wrong. I think it comes from the late 19th century. There was a tremendous prejudice against immigrants from the Catholic parts of Southern and Eastern Europe who were coming to America at the time, people like my great-grandfather. There was also this idea at the end of the Victorian era that science and technology was going to solve all of our problems. Who needs religion anymore? And in particular, the idea of eugenics and the idea that scientifically we could improve the human race. The church was one of the few groups to speak out against it, mostly because it was immoral, even if it works. It turns out it's terrible science as well. But, more sadly, in the 20th century, we discovered that science and technology can be used for evil every much as it can be used for good. Nazi Germany, following eugenics, had the world's most technically advanced death camps. So I think that has woke up a lot of people to the sense that it's not a simple science good, religion bad. There's one other thing, though. Too many people learn science until they're about 12 years old. And for them, science is getting the answers in the back of the book. Science is a big book of answers. And too many people learn religion until they're about 12 years old. And religion is memorizing Bible quotes or getting the answers to the catechism. Neither science nor religion are big books of answers. If they're books of anything, they're books of questions. And when you understand that science doesn't have all the answers, when you understand that we'll never understand theology completely, we'll never understand God, who is beyond our understanding, then you realize that in the gray areas where we don't understand the differences, that's where the excitement is. That's the part where we're about to learn something new.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, you raised a point that often comes up on the channel, and I'm wondering if you still see vestiges of this rivalry, intellectual and cultural, between Northern Europe and the Mediterranean tradition. Do you still see that today in science or in general?
I don't, but I'm old enough that I did see it.
Okay.
I'm old enough to have grown up with it. There's a photograph we have in our visitor center here in Castel Gandolfo. We've got two wonderful telescopes, one dating from the end of the 19th century and one a Schmidt telescope from the 1960s and 70s. And neither of them are usable now because of light pollution. So we have a visitor center here. There was a photograph of a great scientific meeting with Lemaitre and Fred Hoyle and a number of the other great scientists and astronomers of the 1950s discussing stellar populations, which was really the question of, do stars change with time? Does the universe change with time? Which fits into the question that Lemaitre had with the Big Bang. But what's interesting is you look at the 20 greatest astronomers of the day. Obviously, all of them are white. All of them are men. All of them have names from Northern Europe. And even when I was in graduate school in the 1970s, and I was in a department of 10 students starting planetary sciences at the University of Arizona, we were 9 guys and 1 woman, nobody of color, needless to say. And I'm the only one who had a name that ended in a vowel. And that was just 50 years ago. But I'd say in the last 20 years, the last 30 years, a lot of that has changed. We still don't have enough people of color in the field, but we certainly have them now. Some fields are nicely 50-50 male, female, other fields are not. We still have a lot to do to open up science to the rest of the world and to open up the rest of the world to what they can offer us as scientists.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. On the other hand, brother, is it equality in and of itself an end to which we must look for? Is 50%, for example, or an equal representation of every single ethnic group at the Vatican Observatory? Is this something that is laudable in and of itself? It's just out of curiosity.
It's the temperature. It's the temperature in the room. If the temperature is way far away from normal, you know that something's wrong. But it's a symptom. It's not the actual problem. What we should probably be looking for is the case that was the case when I was a graduate student. We all knew we only had 1 woman, and that was sort of odd. But nobody noticed that I was Italian. Even by then, that wasn't anything noteworthy. It's only looking back at the numbers and the names that go, oh, yeah, I guess that was kind of unusual. I never knew it at the time. We also have to recognize that what's really going on, certainly in the immigrant population in America, is that the first wave of immigrants come and they're generally not given the economic opportunities to immediately become astronomers. They're given the opportunities to improve the lives of their families so they can start businesses. So the next generation become the lawyers, and so the generation after then can become the philosophers and the poets and people like us.
Excellent. Well, you're personally leading the work being carried out at the Vatican Observatory. Can you talk about your vision of leadership and your role and where your work and the work of the observatory fits into the larger scientific community?
Sure. The Vatican Observatory has been around in one way or another since the reform of the calendar in the 1580s. But in its modern form, it was founded in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII, and he had a specific goal to show the world that the church supports science. And in those days, it was good PR for the church. It was also good PR for the Vatican as an independent nation because we had a national observatory that other nations would interact with. Nowadays, 130 years later, a lot of those issues are put to the side. Most astronomers are very happy dealing with people of religion, any religion, no religion. And whereas a generation ago, there'd still be some suspicion. Now it's a bragging point. Oh, we've got a Muslim on our team, or, oh, we've got, whatever. Our job at the Vatican Observatory is to continue to do good science and to be assigned not necessarily to the astronomers anymore, but to the people in the pews, to let them know that science is not something to be afraid of, that science is something that allows us to get closer to God, to be an example of that. At the same time, we have a specific role in the larger scientific field, which I'm very excited about. That first of all, we're not competing with the other scientists for the same government grants. We get our money from the Vatican or from the Vatican Observatory Foundation. So that means that we can be impartial judges when it comes time to deciding who gets grant money. Very often, myself or other members of our team have been serving as referees or on panels for NASA or ESA or other organizations that give out money. But more than that, we are free to do long-term survey work. Now, before I was a Jesuit, before I was at the Vatican Observatory, I had my doctorate. I was living on NASA grants, and I had to apply for money that was in a field that NASA was interested in that year, and I had to have results after 3 years or I wasn't going to get any more money. At the Vatican Observatory, we can go down paths that aren't being funded at the moment, and we can do research that may take 10 or 20 years to come to fruition. There are a dozen of us here, and we're each doing different sorts of work. But to give an example of some of this long-term research, the work I've been doing has been physical properties of meteorites. And it's been a 30-year project to get a database of density, porosity, magnetic susceptibility, heat capacity, thermal conductivity for all the different varieties of meteorites. And only now we're able to apply those to asteroids, so that another member of our team is on the Bennu mission as a team member to measure the samples that are coming back from asteroid Bennu. But it took us 10 years to get that program up and running. The first time I presented it at a scientific meeting, one of the grand old men of the field came, "Guy, why are you doing that? Nobody does that work." Well, that's why I'm doing it, because nobody else could do the work. Likewise, we've got people doing surveys of peculiar star spectra, surveys of open clusters that are obscured by interstellar clouds, surveys of meteor impacts, research into some of the more esoteric sides of cosmology, building on what Georges Lemaitre started, including quantum gravity. These are the sorts of things that most scientists can't get the long-term funding to do. And in a lot of cases, they're not glamorous, but they're a service to the field. And I'm not in it for the glamour. I'm not in it to get an award. I'm in it just because I love doing the science. And in that joy of learning the truth, I feel I'm encountering God.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds very liberating to not have to deal with the constraints that the normal academic community has to deal with. Fantastic.
I was telling a friend of mine that, and he goes, "So how do I have to, what do I do to get in on that?" And I said, "Well, you've got to take a vow of celibacy." And he stopped and he said, "My wife's a scientist. She'd understand."
Oh, well, that's a good one. Okay. Well, listen, in the case of Georges Lemaitre, your team has played a role in the translation and perhaps the discovery of his last recorded interview. Can you give us a background to the interview, and then let's talk about the interview itself, the content, and it's the context historically and the significance of what was happening between him and Fred Hoyle.
So my understanding is the interview was done by Dutch television, and maybe a year or two before his death. So this would have been the early 60s. As I'd mentioned, there was this meeting in the late 50s at the Vatican, at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, where Hoyle and Lemaitre first met. And the issue was the nature of the universe and how it is evolving in time. Hoyle was of the idea that goes back to Copernicus that the universe is the same everywhere and at every time. The laws of physics don't change. The laws of physics that are true in one part of the universe are true in a different part of the universe, that are true in one time or true at a different time. And there was both this philosophical comfort of an infinite universe that was always the same, because then you didn't have to worry about where it came from. but also, which is of course not true, you still do have to worry about where it came from. But also, and this was a conversation I once had with Sir Martin Rees, the royal astronomer in Britain, that he wanted to be comfortable in knowing that whatever he was studying would be valid everywhere and every when. The trouble is that, first of all, around 1900, a fellow named Slipher in Flagstaff discovered that galaxies and clusters of galaxies had their spectra redshifted, so that lines that you thought would be at one frequency are actually a slightly shift to the red of where they ought to be. And all clusters of galaxies were shifted as if they were moving away from us. It was a while before Hubble was able to put together the idea that there was a correlation between where they were in space and how fast they were moving. Slipher just noticed that they were moving. So you've got a universe that's expanding. Then people were discovering that stars had different chemical compositions, where you would expect that the old stars that had had time to make chemicals would have more metals in them, and that the young stars that were freshly made out of hydrogen would, be poor in metals. But it's exactly the opposite. That the oldest stars look to be significantly different and metal poor, and it's the younger stars that look to be a new generation of stars that were rich in metal, implying that the universe was changing. Lemaitre and Hoyle met in 1957, each with their own theory. Lemaitre, back in the 20s, had suggested mathematically, he was a great mathematician, that the universe itself was actually expanding. And if this were the case, then the galaxy clusters farther away would be moving faster than the ones closer in. This was confirmed by Hubble about a year after Lemaitre proposed it. And that's why it's now called the Hubble-Lemaitre law. The other thing was that if this is true, then there ought to be a time in the past when the universe was very dense and everything was all in one point. And he called this the cosmic seed. Hoyle didn't like this because it meant that there was a time that was different, where physics was different in the past than it is now. And he made fun of it by calling it, that Big Bang theory. He still had to deal with the fact that the universe was expanding and that you had new stars being formed. So he proposed that there would be atoms of hydrogen spontaneously occurring in the space as between the galaxy clusters, and new stars would constantly be forming out of this, so that at any time it would look just like it looks now. But we can see things expanding because there's new hydrogen being formed to make new stars to keep the system going. And this was the great debate between Hoyle and Lemaitre. What's fascinating, by all accounts, when Lemaitre and Hoyle met each other in 1957 at the Vatican, they became best of friends. They went on trips together. They stayed friendly for the rest of Lemaitre's life. They, of course, would still debate these points. Ultimately, the discovery of the 3-degree black-body radiation and a few other tests of the Big Bang convinced even Hoyle that the Big Bang really did happen.
Yeah, fantastic. What was a little bit not surprising, I suppose, or maybe it was surprising to some, that there are conservative aspects to Lemaitre's approach to science and religion. And if I understand correctly, at one point he even corrected the Pope, who was perhaps a little over-enthusiastic about equating some of the science, some of the discoveries with religious language and concepts.
That's true.
Can you talk about this?
Yeah, there is a temptation always, it's called concordism, to try to take what we've learned now and say, oh, it was in the Bible all along. That's bad theology. We know that doesn't work. Because, if you can bring the Bible into perfect congruence with science of 2022, it's going to be out of congruence by 2122, we hope, because we hope that science will continue. Lemaitre himself started out as a young man with this idea, but recognized that that doesn't work, that it's bad theology. And there's 3 stages here that I want to bring up. First of all, the idea that the science that Lemaitre was coming up with was radical, and Hoyle was more, in keeping with a godless universe. Lemaitre, in this interview that is, available online, and now our guys have translated, points out that the idea of mystically creating hydrogen's atoms out of nothing is far less scientific than the idea of a universe that operates under laws of physics, which just happen to be more complicated than we thought they were, that give us a Big Bang. Because really, the laws of physics of the Big Bang are the same laws of physics that we are working under, just under different boundary conditions. The second was the point that Lemaitre wanted to make with the Pope, that just because the current science of the day says that there is a beginning, this is neither a confirmation nor a denial of creation in Genesis. Pope Francis, in Laudato Si, in his encyclical about the environment and about science, makes the nice point that there's a difference between creation and nature. This is sometimes a subtle point. The beginning of the universe at the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, best we understand it now, is not the same thing as the creation of the universe in Genesis. How do we know that? Because the creation of the Big Bang is still according to the laws of nature. Where did the laws of nature come from? Who created the laws of nature? It occurs in a space-time that includes space and time. Where did space come from? Where did time come from? Why is there something instead of nothing, as Leibniz once asked? Why is there an is? And that's what the creation of Genesis is about. The opening words. In the beginning, God said, well, God's already there before there's a universe. If you're positing God as the creator of the universe, you're positing God as the one who gives us the laws of physics that make a Big Bang possible. And the third point, of course, is in 1,000 years, we hope, if science progresses, the questions that scientists will be asking about the origin of the universe will be so different from the even questions we're asking now that this sort of debate is going to look rather, rather odd. But I'll add one final kicker. A lot of people do confuse those two ideas of creation. Stephen Hawking was one. He worked out a way where he could spontaneously create the Big Bang as a fluctuation in space-time. And he points out a bend in the space-time continuum is what we call gravity. And therefore, if you wait long enough, there would spontaneously be a fluctuation in the space-time continuum that would look like a Big Bang. And he says in one of his books famously, because there is a thing called gravity, I can explain the creation of the Big Bang, and therefore there is no need to invoke God to set things off. But look what he's saying. He's saying his idea of God is the force starts the Big Bang. Very different from the God of Scripture. And then he's saying gravity is what starts the Big Bang. So actually, he's not saying that there's no God. He's saying that he worships the God of gravity. He worships gravity itself as God, which I don't think he really wanted to say. Mm. On the other hand, if God is gravity, that would explain why Catholics celebrate Mass.
Yeah, very interesting.
Long pause for the groans as people appreciate my pun or hate it. I apologize.
No, that's fine. That's very interesting. You mentioned the quantum gravity previously, and one of our goals on the channel and one of our goals as an organization is to study the implications of things at the cutting edge of science and physics and chemistry to some of our problems as a species, some of our management problems. Is there anything that you can say that would point us or listeners toward this direction of connecting some of your work at the Vatican Observatory with some of our challenges that we're facing as a species?
Yeah, I'll say three things that may not be popular, but I think are important. First of all, beware of concordism, not only between, say, Scripture and what we see in science, but between our understanding of who we are. Don't make such a fast mapping of saying, the universe is strange and human beings are strange, therefore they're strange in the same way. Human beings are strange in a very different way. And this was the fallacy of astrology, where people said, oh, we can explain human beings because they're as weird as the motions of the planets in the sky. Well, no, they're not as weird as. Just because two things are weird don't mean that they're the same thing. The second is to recognize the limits of what we know. And I think this is probably much closer to your goal, is to recognize we don't have all the answers, and we're never going to have all the answers. To recognize that the universe, whether it's the creation of quantum gravity or the behavior of the human being, will always surprise us. It's not a matter of coming up with the answers in the back of the book. It's a matter of appreciating and getting used to the way the universe works and the way people work. There's never going to be an answer. There's never going to be one final theory of everything, and then we shake our hands and brush off the dust and say, well, we've solved that one. That's not how science works. That's not how faith works. Rather, it's like a relationship of love. If you love the universe, then you're always going to be discovering new things about it, just as you love your spouse, you love your children, you love your friends, and they're constantly surprising you because that's why you love them. So don't be looking for a single answer or a simple answer or a necessarily congruent answer that this maps onto that, but rather look to the things that are common in all of these searches, which is the joy of discovery, the joy of surprise, and the infinite ability of the human race and the universe to make us see things we would never have imagined before.
Very interesting. Can you talk a little bit? You've promised us 30 minutes, and I'll make this the final question or before we say goodbye. Can you comment briefly on what salvation might mean in the context of your last few comments? What does salvation mean?
To me, salvation is recognizing my mistakes and being able to go beyond them. So salvations occur in a small way every day, just as love is taking the garbage out, without having to be asked. Salvation is all of the little small things we get wrong, all of the little things where we go, oh, got to go back and fix that, where the universe is forgiving, where we need to be equally forgiving of each other.
Very interesting. Brother Guy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. You have so many interesting things to say, and you're in a very special role within the scientific community at the Vatican. So it's very fascinating to listen to you. Where can people, or what do you recommend for people who are interested in knowing more about the compatibility between religion and science?
We've got a website, of course. Who doesn't? It's called Vatican Observatory, all one word, .org, O-R-G. If you go there, you will find not only discussions of topics like this, but a large online resource of about 500 articles, videos, organized by various questions on the larger topic of faith and reason, faith and science. So I think people have a fun time exploring that. VaticanObservatory.org.
Fantastic. Well, once again, thanks so much for taking the time to talk today, Brother Guy.
It's a delight to be here.
To support our discussions with the world's leading thinkers, please see the video description or visit eism.eu/support. Thank you.